Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Because of the more than 100 sand giants, Sima Yunhua and Ji Tianjun had no way to cause any problems for Bai Xiaochun. In fact, they didn't even have time to think about him. If they lost focus for even a moment, they would be in real and profound danger. They alternated between coughing up blood and consuming medicinal pills until, finally, the teleportation power kicked in. As the teleportation light built up, they suddenly felt the relief of having escaped a dangerous experience by the skin of their teeth. At the same time, their hope of getting past the 18th level vanished completely. As they left, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes and stood up, looking very pleased with himself. After brushing the sand and dust off of himself, he stuck his chin up, flicked his sleeve, and coolly said, with the flick of a sleeve, "I, Bai Xiaochun, reduced celestials to ashes. Their biggest mistake was pissing me off to begin with." Bai Xiaochun was extremely pleased with this latest addition to his usual monologue, and decided he should use it again in the future if he could. Meanwhile, the sand giants had all stopped moving, and were just standing there, motionless. Bai Xiaochun looked them over, and felt a bit sad. It wasn't that he hadn't considered taking them with him. Sadly, based on the powers he had gained from the damaged fan, he knew that such puppets could exist only in the 18th level. Outside, they would be mere illusions. I wonder how the sovereign who made this fan was able to do all this. At this point, Bai Xiaochun contemplated passing the 18th level just to annoy Sima Yunhua and Ji Tianjun. After a bit of thought, he decided that doing so would be too suspicious. Therefore, he sighed and gave up on the idea. Moments later, he was teleported away. The instant he reappeared outside, a beam of sword chi slashed toward him. Thankfully, he had been prepared for such a thing. Glaring, he unleashed a fist strike right into the sword chi. A boom rang out, and he staggered backward several hundred meters. However, the sword chi collapsed, and Ji Tianjun, who had already been injured and relying on the power of medicinal pills to keep going, was hit by the backlash, and sent tumbling several thousand meters away. When he ground to a halt, he looked up at Bai Xiaochun with a glare. "You tricked us, Bai Xiaochun," he growled. Sima Yunhua appeared next to Ji Tianjun, eyes shining with cold light as he too stared at Bai Xiaochun. If the two celestials hadn't been injured, Bai Xiaochun would have played it a bit safer. But they were both badly hurt, so he wasn't scared of them at all. Glancing at them snidely out of the corner of his eye, he said, "First we need to clear up the issue of who tricked who. If the two of you want to keep causing trouble, then fine, bring it on. I've had enough of the likes of you." With that he raised his voice loudly. "All right, everyone, pay close attention. I'm not picking a fight with these two, they're bullying me. When we get back to the Saint Emperor dynasty, I'll ask His Majesty to make a fair judgment about it." Ji Tianjun could offer no response to Bai Xiaochun's sharp words, other than a few guttural grunts. However, the killing intent in his eyes grew explosively strong. Sima Yunhua, on the other hand, was a bit more rational. After staring at Bai Xiaochun for a moment, he smiled. "Apparently I underestimated you, fellow Taoist Bai." With that, he clasped hands and bowed, then turned and headed off to meditate. Ji Tianjun remained standing there for a long moment. Eventually, he snorted coldly, suppressed his killing intent, and walked some distance away. For one thing, he knew that he was too badly injured to fight Bai Xiaochun. For another thing, he somehow had the feeling that, in this place, it didn't matter that he had a higher cultivation base. He was still in great danger when it came to dealing with Bai Xiaochun. After Ji Tianjun and Sima Yunhua backed down, the other cultivators who had gathered to watch the scene could already guess what had happened. That was especially true of Preceptor Sideep and the others from the Saint Emperor dynasty. The fact that Sima Yunhua and Ji Tianjun had conceded, and also the sight of Bai Xiaochun's fist strike, left them all shaken. Obviously there was some friction between those three. And in the end, Bai Xiaochun came out on top. He seems relatively harmless, but the truth is that from the moment Bai Xiaochun entered the damaged fan, he hasn't lost any major conflicts, and he just got all the way to the 18th level without expending any effort at all. Everyone looked over at him with fear lingering in their hearts. When Bai Xiaochun realized that, his heart swelled with pride. What can I do? Wherever I go, I end up the center of attention. It's not like I do it on purpose." Shaking his head, he found a place to sit cross-legged and relish his victory. At the same time, he was starting to get antsy about the time limit ending. There was only about half a month left. Things went just as Bai Xiaochun had prayed they would. Time flew by, and before long, it was only 2 days before the time limit ran out. By this point, just about everyone had given up on the challenges. Only 4 or 5 people refused to quit. For them, there was no longer any excitement to be found in their attempts, only dogged persistence. Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua eventually recovered and went back to try to handle the 18th level again. But after failing a few times, they sighed and gave up. Everyone was talking about Celestial Virapaksa, Reverend Devourer and Prince Erdemon. They were still missing, and no one had any idea where they were stuck. Many people had come to the conclusion that they had come across some other good fortune. Even Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua seemed to believe that. When Bai Xiaochun heard such talk, he merely cleared his throat. 2 days passed. It was at that point that, for the first time since the trial by fire began, everyone could use their divine sense again. It was a strange and wonderful sensation for everyone. Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua were particularly delighted. They had participated in too many trials by fire to count in their lives, but had never been as frustrated as they had in this damaged fan. They could accept defeat, but this damaged fan almost seemed to hate them. No matter how hard they tried, the fan just wouldn't let them succeed. Not a single person seemed to regret that the end of the trial had come. In fact, many of them breathed sighs of relief. The past 2 months had been like a torment for most of them. Maybe it's Celestial Virapaksa, Reverend Devourer or Prince Erdemon who will get the ultimate good fortune. That was what many people were thinking. When the final moment came, the fan's spirit automaton again awoke. It had been gone for a long time, and therefore, it was a bit startling. However, it was to everyone's shock that, in that very same moment, the light of teleportation rose up in the main square, and 3 people crawled out of it. Yes, they literally crawled. Their clothing was in tatters, and they had blank looks on their faces. They were also trembling, although they didn't realize it, and were spattered with blood. These were the very 3 people that everyone had suspected of acquiring the good fortune of the trial by fire. Celestial Virapaksa, Prince Erdemon, Reverend Devourer. Everyone stared over in shocked silence at the 3 Celestials, who looked as if they had been trampled by an army of tens of thousands of men and horses. Moments later, people began to cry out in surprise and alarm. This, heavens! Wait, they didn't actually get any good fortune? What happened to them? I can't believe they were tortured to this state. Look at their expressions. That's what you look like when you fall into despair over and over again. And look at all the blood. Bai Xiaochun's voice could be heard amongst the others. Sounding dramatically shocked, he pointed and said, "How could this have happened? I thought I had it bad, but it turns out you 3 had it way worse." No one was really paying attention to him, though. The demigods from the Vile Emperor dynasty, including Li Donghao, hurried over to help the Celestials to their feet. Prince Erdemon and Reverend Devourer seemed to be in a slightly better state. Although they were gasping for breath, they were already recovering mentally. However, Celestial Virapaksa seemed to have been the focus of special attention. As soon as Li Donghao reached out to him, Celestial Virapaksa noticed his towering frame and shrieked, "Don't touch me. I said don't touch me." Celestial Virapaksa recovered quickly. A moment later, he rose to his feet, his eyes blazing as he looked around at the crowd. Prince Erdemon and Reverend Devourer did the same. Their eyes were filled with boundless madness and hatred, to the point where it seemed likely that, if they found out who was responsible for their plight, they would unleash insane rage. The 2 months of torment they had experienced had frequently left them wishing they could die. At the same time, they had come to the conclusion that there was only one explanation for what had occurred: someone had been targeting them specifically. They weren't sure how the deed had been done, but they were sure someone was behind it. The shocked onlookers could see that something strange was going on, and began to consider what it might be. At the same time, Bai Xiaochun was feeling a bit guilty, and was marveling at how powerful these 3 must be to have endured what they had. I can't let them find out it was me. Otherwise they'll definitely go crazy. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he looked around quickly, and began to imitate the expressions on some of the other cultivators' faces. But then, it was definitely you, Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun whipped his head around to find Celestial Virapaksa glaring at him with bright red eyes. His heart leapt with fear, but he simply frowned. "What exactly do you mean?" he said, slowly rising to his feet, and trying to look confused. Celestial Virapaksa took a step forward, but Prince Erdemon quickly reached out to block his path. Prince Erdemon looked closely at Bai Xiaochun for a moment, then looked around at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, presumably all of you experienced some strange situations in this trial by fire. For example, in the trial that only had 9 stairs, there was a moment when 100 stairs appeared. And in another, one puppet became 10, or even 100. I'll be honest with you all. We 3 celestials joined forces to get past the 18th and 19th levels. But in the 20th level, we faced an unending horde of minotaur monsters. That might have been something we could accept, but then we found that we couldn't perform teleportations. Fine, maybe we could accept that too. But after 4 hours passed, we were unable to leave. We were stuck in there all this time, up until a few moments ago. Clearly, something very abnormal is going on, something that should never have happened. Of course, anomalies are always possible, but there shouldn't have been more than one such strange occurrence. Everyone was shaken by what they were hearing, especially Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua. It was definitely true that a lot of strange things had occurred within the past few months. Although everyone had suspected something strange was going on, no one had any proof, nor any way to provide an explanation. Now that Prince Demon was speaking things aloud, people began to occasionally glance over at Bai Xiaochun, who simply blinked and tried to maintain a serious, suspicious expression on his face. As for Prince Demon, he was virtually staring at Bai Xiaochun the entire time, his eyes flickering with hatred. I suspect that someone in our midst somehow became the owner of the damaged fan. In fact, that person has likely already secretly passed the 20th level. That is the only explanation, the only way that someone could target all of us, and keep us 3 celestials trapped in the 20th level. As everyone looked on in stunned silence, Gu Tianjun shivered and suddenly said, "The person most likely to be responsible is Bai Xiaochun. I can't be certain if fellow Taoist Bai is the one responsible," Sima Yunhua added coldly. However, it wasn't very long ago that fellow Taoist Gu and I joined him in attempting to pass the 18th level. Once inside, the sand giants completely ignored him. At this point, many in the crowd began fanning out, as if to surround Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun was very nervous, and knew that if he wasn't very careful, he could make a deadly mistake. Taking a deep breath, he tried to look furious as he shouted, "This is all because I'm from the Heavenspan realm, isn't it? It's because I'm the only celestial from the lands of Heavenspan. You two laid a deadly trap for me in the 18th level. And did you forget how the sand giants also ignored you, Sima Yunhua? It wasn't just me. As for you, Celestial Virupaxa, you were the one targeting me, from the very beginning. That makes me the perfect person to frame. You think I passed the 20th level already? Well, everyone can see the standings, and look, I never got past the 17th level." Bai Xiaochun was just beginning to add some more when Reverend Devourer narrowed his eyes and cut in. "We'll all know very soon whether or not it was you," he said. "The time limit is almost up, and soon everyone will find out who the new owner of the fan is. Then everything will be made clear." Everyone else in the crowd seemed to agree with Reverend Devourer. Bai Xiaochun was feeling very nervous but couldn't think of anything to do. Not only was he surrounded here, but people would surely continue to be angry with him once they were back in the Saint Emperor dynasty. He actually didn't want to have anything to do with the damaged fan now, but now that everyone had their divine sense back, his hands were tied. As Bai Xiaochun stood there nervously, Virupaxa's eyes glittered with killing intent, and Sima Yunhua chuckled coldly. A moment later, the fan began to vibrate, and a force of expulsion appeared, pushing the group out of the main square of the damaged fan. As they were propelled in the direction of the eternal immortal domains, the Saint Emperor and the Vile Emperor appeared. Although they were there to escort their people home, they also took advantage of the moment to try to get to the fan, which now seemed unprotected. However, it was in that very moment that the fan tipped to the side and then flew off of the hand of the enormous sovereign. Instead of heading toward any given person, it began to sail off into the darkness of the void. Bai Xiaochun breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time was a bit shocked. Based on everything that had happened, he had assumed the fan would come to him. Of course, he didn't let his surprise show. After all, the Vile Emperor and Saint Emperor were speeding off into the distance, using unknown techniques to try to reach the fan and enter it. Bai Xiaochun was nervous, but because of the presence of the two emperors, and also how everyone was suspicious of him, he didn't dare to try to reach out and connect with the fan. Feeling very frustrated, he glanced at Celestial Virupaxa, Prince Demon, and Reverend Devourer, and then settled his gaze onto Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua. "Do you people see that?" he said, almost shouting. "First of all, I didn't perform any incantation gestures. Second of all, I didn't use any divine sense. Third of all, I didn't even move a muscle. That fan didn't even move in my direction. The person who tampered with the trial by fire was obviously not me. And I clearly didn't get past the 20th level, much less become the new owner of the fan. I met with the same misfortune as all of you. Obviously, I'm not the one to blame. Someone used you, Celestial Virupaxa. And you misjudged the situation, Prince Demon. What about you, Reverend Devourer? Why haven't you said anything yet? And then there's you, Sima Yunhua. Things aren't settled between the two of us." His words were met with silence. None of the Celestials could offer a single retort. Everyone looked in the direction of the disappearing fan. Although Bai Xiaochun hadn't directly mentioned either the Saint Emperor or the Vile Emperor, based on what he had said, and what was happening now, people had come to their own conclusions about the matter. Unfortunately, there was no way to confirm the theory. Celestial Virapaksa said nothing. He simply turned and left. Mixed emotions could be seen in Prince Demon's eyes, and Reverend Devourer's face was extremely grim as the two of them left. Sima Yunhua and Gu Tianjun exchanged a glance, then sighed inwardly. Shaking their heads, they left. Before long, everyone was taking advantage of the magical light left behind by the two emperors to return home to the dynastic capital cities in the eternal immortal domains. After returning to Saint Emperor City, Bai Xiaochun finally breathed a true sigh of relief. The crisis had passed. However, the matter of who controlled the fan had him feeling very anxious. How come it didn't come to me? Is it because I didn't call out to it? But it's a sovereign precious treasure. Bai Xiaochun felt his heart dripping with figurative blood. He considered trying to make contact with the fan, but in the end, decided not to. He would bide his time until the Saint Emperor returned. After all, if he tried to make contact and failed, it wouldn't matter. But if he succeeded and the Saint Emperor noticed, it could have major repercussions. Sighing, he returned to his blessed land in Saint Emperor City. All of the cultivators he saw were clearly edgy in his presence. And Heavenly Marquis Lu was obviously keeping a close eye on him. But he was in no mood to care about that. He simply sat there in his blessed land, waiting. Half a month later, the Saint Emperor had still not returned. That was when something happened that affected all of the eternal immortal domains. A feeling descended upon all living beings, seemingly from the heavens above. Furthermore, a voice began to whisper into the ears of everyone alive. The Vile Emperor dynasty and Saint Emperor dynasty began to stir in just the way they had when Bai Xiaochun became a celestial. However, this time, the source was not Saint Emperor City but rather Vile Emperor City. Someone is becoming a celestial. Heavens. 2 celestials in 1 year. When the cultivators in the Saint Emperor dynasty realized what was happening, they looked in the direction of Vile Emperor City, crying out in alarm and shock. Gu Tianjun, Sima Yunhua and Chen Su had all been meditating in their respective blessed lands. But now, their eyes were wide with astonishment. Bai Xiaochun was also ripped out meditation as a voice began to speak to him. He could also sense that all of the eternal immortal domains were being shaken. Eventually, the voice speaking into the ears of all beings in the world became very clear. A 12th celestial exists in the world, named Taoist Heavenspan. The people in the Saint Emperor dynasty were shaken and gasped in shock. As for those in the Vile Emperor dynasty, they fell into wild jubilation. Another celestial, Taoist Heavenspan? That name sounds familiar. That's someone from the Heavenspan realm, right? But I thought he was dead? Heavenspan realm. So in only 1 year, and only a few months apart, it produced 2 celestials. What terrifying reserve powers they had built up. It's a good thing the two of them don't get along. As the buzz of conversation filled the world, Bai Xiaochun slowly rose to his feet, his expression grim and filled with insane killing intent. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared off into the distance, and it was only after a long moment that he managed to get his killing intent under control. Heavenspan, you bastard, he grated. So, you really aren't dead. All of a sudden, he thought back to everything from the Heavenspan realm. He thought back to the climactic final battle. He thought back to Bai Hao. He thought back to Du Lingfei. He thought back to all of the other painful images. No, Taoist Heavenspan was not dead. Back when the Heavenspan realm collapsed, his cultivation base was at the quasi-celestial level. However, he had spectacular talent. And because of his deep understanding of the undying live forever technique, he had already formed part of his Daoseed. Bai Xiaochun had actually laid eyes on it. When Taoist Heavenspan's body collapsed at the end of their final battle, he had seen a clump of magical symbols which was none other than a Daoseed. Normally speaking, after the world was destroyed, and Taoist Heavenspan received a mortal blow, it shouldn't have mattered that he had part of a Daoseed. He should have perished then. But it just so happened that he was teleported into one of the immortal domains controlled by the Vile Emperor dynasty. And the first person to detect the fluctuations of his Daoseed was the Vile Emperor. The Vile Emperor took him in, a secret that was kept from even the other celestials. As far as the Vile Emperor was concerned, Taoist Heavenspan was like a rare treasure worth keeping in his back pocket. Back when Bai Xiaochun had made his breakthrough, Taoist Heavenspan was trying to do the same thing, and had even sensed Bai Xiaochun's breakthrough. For Taoist Heavenspan, making that breakthrough from demigod to celestial was extremely difficult. He got stuck in the third tribulation, and repeatedly failed to get the approval of the Eternal Mother. However, at one point, the Vile Emperor gave him a chunk of black stone that miraculously gave Taoist Heavenspan what he needed, right in the moment when he believed he had failed. And therefore, when Taoist Heavenspan made his breakthrough and became a celestial, all people in the Vile Emperor dynasty became aware of his existence. The voice of the Eternal Mother spoke into the ears of all living beings, leading to widespread shock in both of the imperial dynasties. Most shocked of all, though, were the people of Heavenspan scattered throughout the rest of the eternal immortal domains. Mixed emotions of all sorts rose up in their hearts. Deep within a private chamber in Vile Emperor City, Taoist Heavenspan opened his eyes, then threw his head back and laughed maniacally. Rising to his feet, he slowly looked in the direction of Saint Emperor City, his eyes flickering with bizarre emotions. Despite being separated by an entire world, he and Bai Xiaochun could somehow sense each other, and both of their eyes began to glow with icy coldness and killing intent. Bai Xiaochun, you being a bit faster won't matter in the end. He waved his hand, causing a black robe to settle down over his shoulders, including a deep hood that covered his face. How wonderful that the Eternal Mother speaks of new celestials. That way, everyone who knows me has been told that I'm back. Looking away from Saint Emperor City, he turned and vanished into the darkness. It was at that exact same moment that, back in Saint Emperor City, Bai Xiaochun also retracted his gaze. The fact that you're alive just means that I can kill you again. Closing his eyes, he settled back down cross-legged to continue meditating. Time passed. 10 days later, the Saint Emperor returned. No one knew if he returned with anything in his possession. Furthermore, he didn't hold court. A few days passed, whereupon he issued a single dharmic decree. Bai Xiaochun was named a celestial guardian in the second immortal domain of the Saint Emperor dynasty. He would hold authority over the entire immortal domain. The truth was that the Saint Emperor dynasty only controlled most of that immortal domain, not all of it. Its northern prefectures had been occupied by the Vile Emperor dynasty for many years. That state of affairs had resulted from a situation similar to when the Saint Emperor acquired a handful of prefectures in exchange for handing over Gongsun Waner. Therefore, although the Saint Emperor dynasty maintained control of the immortal domain as a whole, the Vile Emperor dynasty had a foothold there. That immortal domain had to remain on constant guard against the Vile Emperor dynasty. Furthermore, small-scale warfare played out on the actual border regularly. Whoever was appointed the Celestial Guardian would be responsible for overseeing such war efforts. For many years, the person to hold that title was one of the most qualified Celestials, Zhao Yuanhan, who bore the Taoist name Aged Spirit. Celestial Aged Spirit had been in the second immortal domain for years, and had never rotated out to give the position to another Celestial. And the dharmic decree which had just been issued did not relieve him of his duties. Instead, both he and Bai Xiaochun would serve as Celestial Guardians at the same time. Therefore, it was obvious to Bai Xiaochun what this appointment really indicated. It was essentially sending him to the second immortal domain with no actual power or authority. He could have access to cultivation resources and could maintain a high status, but wouldn't have any power. It makes it seem like I'm there to defend one of the immortal domains, but really, it's more just to keep me busy. He wasn't angry. In fact, it was actually a good thing. After all, the giant Ghost King was in the second immortal domain, and it had been a long time since the two of them had seen each other. He still felt the urge to try to contact the damaged fan, but being as cautious as he was, he forced himself not to. He would at least wait until he was away from Saint Emperor City before giving it a shot. Thus, he packed his bags, and without any fanfare, left the next day at dawn, a beam of bright light shooting through the air. His departure led to many sighs of relief in Saint Emperor City. Although there were no drums or gongs, there was much cheering and laughter. The walking disaster is walking away, ha ha ha. Celestial Aged Spirit is in for a big headache, what a pity. King Heavenspan has his upsides. It's too bad we couldn't send him to Vile Emperor City. I'd be willing to bet that, if he were given the right set of circumstances, he could destroy the entire place. Some distance away from Saint Emperor City, Bai Xiaochun hovered in midair, looking back over his shoulder. Considering the level of his cultivation base, it was easy for him to hear the sound of rejoicing behind him, although not perfectly clearly. Haven't experienced this feeling for a long time. He couldn't help but clear his throat a bit. After all, he knew exactly what was going on, and it was somewhat embarrassing. Thankfully, he knew exactly how to deal with that embarrassment. It's all my fault. In his heart, he sighed deeply. After all, it had been a long time since he realized that no matter what he did in life, he couldn't stop being outstanding. What other explanation could there be? How come whenever I stay anywhere for a bit of time, people always get so emotional? Mount Hood, the Spirit Stream sect, the Bloodstream sect, the River Defying sect, the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect, the Wildlands. And now, even the people in the eternal immortal domains realize how outstanding I am. Swishing his sleeve, he turned around and continued on his way. Whatever. Now that I'm heading into the second immortal domain, I definitely have to keep a low profile. As he moved along, he thought about the Saint Emperor's decree, and no matter what angle he considered it from, it left him feeling like he had been kicked out into the cold. I'm afraid that if I reveal my outstanding nature to the people of the second immortal domain, the Saint Emperor will just find another way to oppress me. It was easy to see what kind of situation he was getting into. The second immortal domain already has a celestial in charge of it. If I end up having any problems with this other celestial, the Saint Emperor definitely won't take my side. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he realized more than ever that he had to keep a low profile. Being too outstanding isn't a good thing. Well, I guess it's like that old phrase. How does it go? Everyone is jealous of the tallest tree in the forest. It caused him to think back to how everyone had targeted him in the damaged fan, and indignation grew stronger in his heart. However, he forced himself to calm down and proceed on his way. Half a month sped by. Bai Xiaochun wasn't in a rush, so he kept a moderate pace and enjoyed the scenery. With his celestial cultivation base, there weren't very many things in the eternal immortal domains that could cause problems for him. Nor was he worried about people trying to kill him. The number of people who qualified to try to do that could be counted with a few fingers. Another 7 days went by, and he was finally in the second immortal domain. At this point, it was getting very hard to stop thinking about the damaged fan. That was especially true considering that, based on his analysis, the danger involved in trying to reach out to it was minimal. Furthermore, if he ended up losing the fan because he had ignored it, it would be a huge travesty. I can't wait any longer, he thought. After making his decision, he waited 3 more days, then gritted his teeth and reached out to the fan via the strange connection between the two of them. At first, he was fidgeting with nervousness, but after a moment passed, his expression flickered. He made a few more attempts, and then started to get flustered. How come there's no reaction at all? Don't tell me the fan flew too far away? Or did one of those emperors steal it? Damn it, I worked myself to the bone to get that fan and keep it safe. Unwilling to give up, he tried a few more times. And thus, what should originally have been a journey of about half a month turned into a full month, as every day, he would spend time reaching out to the damaged fan. Thankfully, his efforts were not in vain. On the 10th day, he was delighted to discover that he felt something stirring between himself and the fan, although the fan was clearly in a very distant location. So, I'm not too late. Enlivened, he used more divine sense and spent more time trying to get a reaction. As he did, the capital city of the second immortal domain grew closer and closer. He saw endless numbers of towering mountains and countless flowing rivers. There were innumerable wild beasts, sects, and cities. It was almost like a veil being lifted, revealing all of the details of the eternal immortal domains. Just as he had learned before, the second immortal domain was divided into northern and southern parts. The part closest to the Saint Emperor dynasty was the south. The immortal domain as a whole contained 16 prefectures, with the Saint Emperor dynasty controlling 11 of them. The other 5, those in the north, were sparsely populated, and were as separate from the others as if they had been cleaved away from them with a sharp blade. Those 5 were either occupied by the vile Emperor dynasty, or were disputed territory. 5 prefectures in the north, and 11 in the south. Every prefecture had different topography and terrain, but at the moment, Bai Xiaochun wasn't interested in looking at the scenery anymore. Although he appeared to simply be hurrying on his way, virtually all of his attention was focused on the damaged fan. Eventually, after repeated attempts, it was when he was only about 3 days out from the capital city that he finally made direct contact with the slip of divine sense he had left on the fan. The instant it happened, it felt like his mind was being struck by lightning. He stopped flying through the air and began panting as, all of a sudden, he experienced a vision. He saw a starry sky that was completely dark and stretched on without end. The enormous damaged fan was slowly floating through that starry sky, going in some unknown direction on a never-ending journey. My precious fan, he thought, his heart pounding at the sight of it. At this point, the vision began to ripple. Worried that the fan might float too far away, he quickly added more power to his divine sense in the hopes of stopping it from moving. Unfortunately, he had overestimated his level of control. Originally, he had assumed that after the trial by fire ended, the 20% control he had acquired would be enough to earn the fan's approval. But now, it was obvious that that was not the case. The fan was still without an owner, and Bai Xiaochun's control over it was minimal. In fact, his level of authority had apparently slipped down to 10%. And within a few months, he would lose even that. It's definitely the spirit automaton of the fan. It's taking advantage of my absence to erase my branding mark. More anxious than ever, he exerted more effort. As he did, the previously smoothly floating fan suddenly began to vibrate and shine with flickering light. Excitement flooded through him, and yet, before he could do anything else, a roar of rage filled his ears, its source being the spirit automaton of the damaged fan. Clearly, the spirit automaton had awoken after their previous conflict, and was now doing its best to fight back again. Once it succeeded, the mere 10% of the fan that Bai Xiaochun occupied would be taken away from him. Although his branding mark was indeed being slowly erased, that didn't take away his control of the fan. Damn it, he growled angrily. Despite the huge distance involved, he used his divine sense to fight with the spirit automaton. Although he knew he couldn't win such a fight, as long as his branding mark remained, he wouldn't just give in. As howls of rage filled his mind, he found a convenient place to sit cross-legged, whereupon an indeterminable amount of time passed. It was evening when he finally opened his eyes, his robes soaked with sweat. His eyes were bloodshot and exhausted, and he was gasping for breath. But there in his hand was a glowing sphere of light that gradually shrank down into the form of a command medallion. That command medallion was what he had gained after this round of conflict with the spirit automaton of the fan, after it had been forced back to sleep. This spirit automaton is definitely tough. No wonder I don't qualify to be the owner of the fan yet. If it weren't for that automaton, I definitely would have been able to bring the fan back. This time, all I got was this command medallion. He wasn't very pleased about it, which was compounded by the fact that he didn't understand it. However, he did get the feeling that it was some sort of key. A key that represented his level of power. After a long moment passed, he sighed and prepared to put the command medallion away. However, it was at that point that his expression flickered, and he looked down at the command medallion. That aura, what is it? Bai Xiaochun closely examined the aura of the command medallion, and as he did, was shocked to find that his fatigue was rapidly fading away. This was different from the powers of regeneration of his fleshly body. This was mental fatigue, and at the moment, his mental state was rapidly returning to its peak. Delighted, he continued to focus his attention on the command medallion, but wasn't able to find any more detailed clues. All he knew was that its aura really could help him recover his vitality. It's not spiritual energy, he decided. From what he could tell, it was energy from the world that the previous owner of the fan had come from, and was similar to the spiritual energy in the eternal immortal domains. I wonder if this energy has any other uses. Eyes sparkling, he did a few tests, even performing some breathing exercises while holding the command medallion in hand. To his shock and delight, absorbing the energy from this command medallion helped him practice cultivation at a much faster speed. Not only did it flow through him especially quickly, he was able to absorb it much faster than ordinary spiritual energy. Furthermore, the complete mental clarity it brought made it obvious that this command medallion was a valuable treasure. The energy in this command medallion is better than any medicinal pill I've ever seen. If this little command medallion is so awesome, you can only imagine how incredible the fan itself is. It's too bad there were so many people in it last time, making it impossible to study closely. The next day at dawn, he opened his eyes. He was now more excited than ever, and more determined to wrest the fan away from the will that existed in it. He put the command medallion away and looked around to see where he was. A moment later, he was flying at rapid speed toward the capital city of the second immortal domain. 3 days later, he saw an enormous statue rising up in front of him, surrounded by crisscrossed mountain ranges, a huge city at its feet that looked like a crouching beast. There were many cultivators in the city, and as evening fell, the din of their voices rose up high into the sky. Bai Xiaochun eyed the city, and then cleared his throat. Although he was attempting to keep a low profile, he was a celestial after all, and one of the two most important and powerful people in this entire immortal domain. As such, keeping a low profile was really strange. Well, I guess I just need to get used to it. Low profile is the way to go. Sighing, he kept his divine sense reined in and headed toward one of the main gates of the city in the same manner that an ordinary cultivator would. It was a very large city, with 8 main gates. Usually, 5 of them were kept open to allow the hosts of traveling cultivators in and out. Squads of guards manned the gates, keeping an eye on the bustling throngs. This was the capital city, where a celestial presided over the entire immortal domain, so no one would dare to act poorly here. Furthermore, the city guards all had extraordinary cultivation bases. As for the guards at the gates, they wore spectacular suits of armor, and were all in the great circle of core formation. There were even diva fluctuations coming from the watchtower high above the gate. Clearly, a diva was inside who was tasked with watching over what was happening outside. It all formed a powerful threat that would surely intimidate any visitors into being very cautious. Bai Xiaochun could see cultivators with all sorts of cultivation bases around him, waiting to pass through the strict inspection before entering the city. Although they kept their voices down, it was possible to overhear some of their conversations. I can't believe they even have a diva inspecting people. I guess times really are unstable. I wonder when we'll have true peace. Did you hear that war broke out in the north again? That vile emperor dynasty really is repulsive. It seems war breaks out every few years in the north. When he heard the things they were talking about, he blinked a few times. Most of what he knew about the second immortal domain came from reading the official records. As for the specific details of what was happening right now, he wasn't too clear. However, talk of war didn't interest him much, so he paid little attention to that sort of gossip. As the line inched forward, he looked left and right to take in the new sights. Occasionally, a particularly important cultivator would fly overhead and land directly in front of the gate. Even as such cultivators brushed the dust off of their shoulders, the guards at the gate would offer respectful greetings, and immediately let them in. Such cultivators would always draw the envious attention of the crowd. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was itching to do the same thing, but continued to remind himself that he was keeping a low profile. I really need to get used to this low-profile thing, he thought. Gradually, the line moved along, and soon it was Bai Xiaochun's turn. First, he paid some spirit stones, then he allowed the diva's divine sense to scan him. Just as he was about to head into the city, beams of light suddenly began to streak toward the city gate from off in the distance. As they neared, incredible pressure radiated out in all directions, causing clouds of dust to rise into the air. Soon, the beams of light faded, revealing dozens of figures. Most were in the great circle of the nascent soul stage, but 5 of them were diva experts. They reeked of blood, as though they had just come from a battlefield. Leading them was a particularly burly fellow, stalwart and broad-shouldered, with a violet robe. He was the type who seemed threatening without being angry, and as soon as the guards saw him, their expressions flickered with shock. Then they treated him with even greater courtesy than any of the other important people they had let into the city earlier. Well met, Marquis Zilin. Suddenly, the diva flew out from the watchtower and approached. Clasping hands with utmost respect, he said, "Well met, Marquis Zilin." When the other cultivators lined up at the city gate heard this, they were visibly shocked, and even began to cry out in surprise. That's Marquis Zilin? He serves as the preceptor of the northernmost prefecture. Yeah, that's definitely him. I saw him from a distance once, when the Saint Emperor bestowed him with the title Marquis. Despite how shocked the crowd was, not even this burly Marquis Zilin was allowed to simply fly into the city. He also had to walk through the gate. It was very thought-provoking to Bai Xiaochun, and really served to emphasize how different the capital city was. According to the rules, not even a demigod expert was allowed to fly inside of it. Marquis Zilin smiled faintly, and quickly clasped hands in salute to the diva. Without saying anything else, he and his men walked toward the gate, fairly radiating murderous auras. The guards turned to push everyone else to the side so that they wouldn't get in Marquis Zilin's way. Of course, they didn't actually need to do that. The crowd respectfully began to back up without any urgings. Bai Xiaochun was right there in the crowd, but was already starting to feel a bit irritated. After all, he had already paid the spirit stone tax and been scanned, and therefore, should have been allowed to proceed into the city. As the crowd backed up, he remained standing in place, until he was conspicuously out in the open. The guards were not pleased, and one of them yelled, "Hey, what are you doing standing there?" He even walked forward with the intention of pushing Bai Xiaochun back. At this point, Bai Xiaochun glared at the guard, causing the man to shiver. His mind even went a bit blank. Although he didn't recognize Bai Xiaochun, his gaze contained power that struck him all the way down to the soul, resulting in him simply standing there unmoving. "I already paid my spirit stones," Bai Xiaochun said loudly. "Why the hell should I have to get out of the way?" Swishing his sleeve, he ignored the crowd and turned to enter the city. Everyone in the area was completely stunned, even Marquis Zilin. At the moment, none of them could assess his cultivation base, and yet, nobody seemed worried about that. In their shock, many of them began to look over at the diva expert who oversaw this particular gate. The diva frowned. He knew that Marquis Zilin was a direct descendant of celestial aged spirit, and therefore didn't dare to offend him. Waving his right hand, he caused a glowing shield to spring up and block Bai Xiaochun's way. Bai Xiaochun didn't do anything rash. He simply turned around, an enigmatic smile on his face as he looked at the diva and asked, "What are you doing?" Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.